Hello and welcome everyone to our next series in Advances in Clinical Trials, Faster and Better, and in the week of International Clinical Trials Day. Today, our session focuses on decentralized clinical trials. My name's Dr. Suki Balendra. I'm the Life Sciences Lead for the NIHR Clinical Research Network based in Northwest London. The COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the adoption of decentralized clinical trials, although the pace of change in the UK has been somewhat slower than the US. Clinical trial sponsors are continually seeking to make clinical trials faster and to improve the experience for the patients and the healthcare professionals. Decentralized trials has emerged as a critical tool in this pursuit. It involves bringing an increasing proportion of a trial's activities to the patient rather than the traditional paradigm of the patient visiting the site. There are, of course, elements of decentralized trials that existed before the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has certainly accelerated trial activities being conducted remotely and in patients' homes. The shift of clinical trial activities closer to patients has also been enabled by evolving technologies and services. Today, we will hear from a sponsor company about to embark on a fully decentralized trial in the UK. The trial will certainly test our systems and infrastructure. This trial will not fit the conventional boxes that we usually have for approvals and setting up trials. And as NHS organisations, we will certainly have to think very differently about these studies. We will also hear from a company which provides services to sponsor companies to run decentralised trials. And this company has extensive experience in the US. We also have the great privilege of having Dr. David Collier here from Barts, who will give his insights from an NHS perspective about running decentralized trials in the UK. So I will now hand over to Ivana from MedCity to introduce our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Suki. Hi, my name is Ivana Poparic, and I'm a head of cluster development at MedCity. I will be moderating the panel discussion today. But first, I have a pleasure of introducing our speakers. So our first presentation is going to be from Ruth Davies, who is a country clinical operations lead at Roche Products. And she has 15 years of experience in managing clinical trials, processes, and optimizing the results to bring new drugs to the patients. Ruth has worked in different roles across pharma sector, and she's been with Roche for the last 2 years, where she has been focusing on finding out how clinical trials can change to bring more benefit to the patients and make them more accessible and patient-friendly. Ruth, over to you.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Can you all see that? Can someone just give me a thumbs up? Brilliant, thank you. So thank you, Ivana. So my name is Ruth Davies. As I say, I've worked with Roche, and I'm going to talk today about the Alpha T study that we're in setup, that's in setup at the moment. So the Alpha T study is a phase 2 open label single arm decentralized, home-based approach study to evaluate the efficacy and safety of alectinib in locally advanced or metastatic ALK-positive solid tumours. So this is going to be Roche's first oncology fully decentralised study. So it's obviously very important to us, and I think it's going to really sort of test the waters for future decentralised studies. So first of all, I just wanted to give a kind of an overview of what is a decentralised study. So a decentralized study, so I can't actually see everything, so I'm just going to, A decentralized study is a clinical trial that is conducted at or near the patient's home. It fits the day-to-day life for the patients. It allows patients to participate wherever they live, because the contact is via video call with the investigator. It allows connection to the medical team they already know and who they visit routinely, and it provides reliable data to support drug labelling claims. Also, potentially, it could bring better drug trial access to the patients. It could mean that there's more diverse and representative patient population within our clinical trials. It could give us identification and inclusion of more patients from rare populations, because obviously they don't need to travel as far. And also it could enhance feasibility for studies, and hopefully in general could give patients a better, the better patient experience, resulting in retention as well within studies, which means obviously we get better data as well. Go to the next slide. Sorry, I've frozen. Oh, sorry. Okay, so the next slide here is the, I've just put this in for sort of the classical approach to clinical trials to the fully decentralized approach to clinical trials, just for an overview. So you can see from the classical approach, generally we used to do, from a pharma company, we used to do feasibility, country selection and site selection based on the main hospitals and the patient location around those main hospitals, which could mean that patients were travelling quite far for clinical trials, with a potential inconvenience for not just multiple lengthy visits, but also multiple visits to hospitals far away. So the fully decentralised approach to clinical trials means that for feasibility and selection, really we'll be using PIs with experience and qualifications, and they could be obviously anywhere in the UK. And then also that could mean, obviously that will mean, sorry, that the patients will stay at home. So they'll have all treatment at home. So they'll have interaction with the PIs and the study coordinators via remote calls via telemedicine. They'll have mobile nurses come into their homes to have all the study assessments, and there'll be obviously specialised courier services for IMP, blood draws, and things like that. So that's the sort of like the differences. So for the decentralised trial model that we're going for Alpha T, we're hoping that this model allows more efficient recruitment for rare populations by bringing obviously the trial to the patient wherever they could be in the UK. As I said, so the patients will be treated at home. So this removes the geographical constraints of clinical trials, the site catchment areas. So for this study, there'll be one site in the UK. So that'll be one chief investigator and PI, obviously they'll have the dual roles, but just one site in the UK. The patients can be identified from anywhere in the UK, and then they'll be referred from wherever they're identified to this one site to be treated. But the patients obviously will be treated at their home. So I've got this proposed operations flow for the Alpha T study here. Obviously, you know, it is quite a busy slide, but I just want to point out this is the part of the conduct of the study. So identification of the patient and referral of the patient is something completely different. But I think for this talk and this kind of you know, today, it's probably better just to look at the conduct and how we plan to run the study. So as you can see at the top here, we've got this sort of orange box, which is the activities that will happen at the investigator site. And then down the bottom, you've got the patients at home. Oh, sorry, I don't know why that's not, there we go. So yeah, the yellow box is the activities that will happen at the home. So as I said, there'll be one investigator site, which obviously will be where the main research team will sit. And then once the patient is identified, they will be obviously referred to this investigator for treatment within the clinical trial. So the investigator or the research team will then contact the patient via telemedicine and have a conversation with the patient about the study to see if they're interested, and potentially perform the informed consent remotely via telemedicine. So once the patient has agreed to participate in the study and complete the informed consent, the mobile nurse will be informed. The mobile nurse will then schedule a screening visit with the patient and the research team, and then will come to the patient's home to perform the screening visit. When they come for the screening visit, the mobile nurse will, as I say, organise a visit at the same time the research team are available. So during that screening visit, the mobile nurse and the patient will be at the patient's home, and the research team, investigator, research nurse coordinator, whoever chooses to be, will be remote on that call. So all three will be present for that screening visit. All the assessments for the screening visit will then occur at the patient's home. So they'll have, the mobile nurse will facilitate vital signs, ECGs, the physical exam, obviously in conjunction with the investigator remotely, all the other assessments that are required for the study, including drawing bloods, which they will then spin at the patient's home, and then they will ship off to the central lab or the local lab at the investigator site for the for the safety labs. So the only reason that the patient will need to leave their home for this study would be to have their CT scans. So this is this dotted line, obviously up to their local radiology facility. So for the screening visit, we would have to engage with the local radiology facility, be that whether that is a private facility or an NHS facility. It would be, the closest to that patient, so they can actually go to and have their CT scans done. So they'll have as soon as the images are done, they will then be sent to the local site, to the investigator or the radiologist at the local site, to be reported, to have their RECIST completed, and then obviously the investigator will review for the patient. So obviously that's all just for the screening. If the investigator deems that the patient is eligible, obviously they'll inform the patient, and then the visits as they go according to the protocol will be conducted. Just as a side thing here as well for the IMP. So the IMP will be stored at the investigator site as with any other traditional study. The only difference is once it's dispensed, it will be shipped directly to the patient's home. And the mobile nurse will be present for the first shipment to take it all out of the box and unpackage it, and then the mobile nurse will explain exactly how the drug needs to be taken, and obviously that will all be documented. At the same time, Roche CRA project managers will always be there to help out as well. We appreciate this is a completely different design that's happened, so we'll be there to help as possible. So that's that. We appreciate that there is a lot of concerns and questions I'm sure that will come out of this. I just wanted to highlight a few things, the differences between the fully decentralized and traditional trial in different things, just so you're aware of. If you have any questions, obviously then we can discuss these during the panel session. So study investigator during this study, specific to a fully decentralized trial, the PI will only see the patient via video calls or telemedicine calls. But as in a traditional trial, it still will be, the investigator will still have the same responsibilities as per ICH GCP. So everything that falls under their responsibilities in a traditional trial will still be the same, and it'll still be their responsibility to ensure the safety of this patient. Then coming on to the actual safety management. So again, the PI will only see the patient via video calls and telemedicine. However, as in within a traditional trial, the patient will still have access to when they are enrolled as a patient, they'll be given contact details of the research team or a contact number that they can ring to discuss any adverse events, or if they want to discuss anything about the trial, then obviously they will have a contact number that they can contact. So as in within a traditional trial, if the site calls to discuss an AE, if the issue is simple, so it can be dealt over the phone, the PI will make the appropriate decision recommendation. If it's obviously emergency, the PI will obviously inform the patient to go to A&E. And if there's any need for an additional assessment, obviously to make an assessment, then the PI obviously will make the prescription or referral to someone obviously close to the patient, so they don't have to travel too far. And that's the same for an extra ad hoc assessment as well. So if it can't be completed by the mobile nurse in conjunction with the PI over the remote call, then it will be performed via HSPC close to the patient's home. Mobile nursing, so specific to this obviously study, the nurses will come to the patient's home in conjunction with the PI and the study coordinator and perform those visits. As in with the traditional trial, the study nurse or the mobile nurse will complete a range of activities done, kind of according to the protocol. So they'll do the blood draws, the IMP accountability, physical examination, obviously in conjunction with the PI, but generally it's the usual assessments that are done, especially within this protocol. We've got ECGs, vital signs. So there's a couple of obviously, kind of things that we're going, which will be done as routinely, but at the patient's home. Obviously, we've seen mobile nursing as well as being implemented in other trials, so it does seem to be becoming a popular option for patients in other studies. The one big thing that comes up is the source data, so obviously ensuring that all the data is stored and how we do that. So specific to this study is that most of the data is going to be expected to be entered directly in the patient's notes by the study team. So as I've said, obviously during these visits, there'll be a call between the investigator or the study team, the mobile nurse and the patient. And then it'll be expected that the study team is collecting notes during the remote call as they would do with any other study. And obviously all the documents will be in there. Obviously, if there's any patient reported outcomes, ECG reports or CT scans or anything like that that produces a hard copy, then these will actually be emailed or posted to the team to be entered into the ECRF. And then within, as like in a traditional study, the source documents for the assessment is specified in the source data location form. So we'll know exactly where the source for each part of the study, which assessment, is. And then also again, just any of the hard copies will be filed at in the patient's file at the site. I think, and then lastly, it's just the IMP delivery. As I said before, specific for this study, the hospital's pharmacy will dispense, in this study, it's alectinib. The hospital pharmacy will dispense these bottles as prescribed by the investigator by secure courier straight to the patient's home. Patients will be instructed not to open the package, obviously, until the mobile nurse is there. Hopefully, we will coordinate the delivery so that kind of the delivery happens at the same time as the mobile nurse arrives. And the nurse will obviously open the package, check the bottle integrity and the label, and then help instruct the patient and help them to take alectinib. Obviously, this is an oral study drug, so it's obviously perfect for a decentralized study. And then, as within a traditional study, obviously pre-labeled bottles of the study drug will be dispatched straight from Roche to the study site, so that's where they'll be stored. And then, as and when a study drug is dispensed, obviously they'll be sent to the patient, and they'll be sent. All drug shipments will be sent temperature controlled. So. So we appreciate there's a lot to take in from this study, and as Suki said, there's kind of a lot of boundaries that are going to be pushed within this study and how we do things. I think our biggest challenges that we foresee for this study is definitely going to be the communication between the PI and the local oncologist, and just ensuring that there is this line of communication and having it very clear. Kind of what, like the lines of communication and who deals with what, and kind of just ensuring that we've got this correct, obviously for the interest of the patients. We need to understand obviously identification or referring patients, and appreciate we haven't obviously discussed that in this study, in this talk, but I think for us it's something we really need to be very clear on in understanding when a patient is referred to for clinical trials, what happens, kind of in the middle, and that kind of links into the communication as well between the PI and the local oncologist. And then lastly, I think we appreciate that local imaging centres, NHS mostly, are hugely struggling with capacity at the moment. So we think that obviously contracting with local imaging centres for patients just for their CT scans for a clinical trial may be difficult, hence why we're also looking at private options as well. But they're the three things that we are kind of focusing on, that kind of we're looking at to run this study smoothly. Obviously, anything else that you think that we really need to start thinking about, or any questions you have, then please just bring it up in the panel session. And that's me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. This was a very insightful talk. We will now continue to our next speaker, Kristin Croucher. Before doing that, well, Kristin is setting up her slides. If you have any questions, as Ruth mentioned, just please pop them into the chat, and we're going to address them at the end of all of the talks. So I would like to introduce next Kirsten, who is a VP of Clinical Operations and Delivery at Lightship. She's a life sciences strategist, and her experience includes 2 decades of managing various teams and implementing high-level multinational and niche clinical trials operations across US, Africa, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. So basically the whole world. Currently, Kirsten is Vice President of Clinical Operations and a virtual first and hybrid clinical research organization. Kirsten, over to you.
Thank you, Ivana. First, just to check, Ivana, you can see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect.
You're ready to go.
Great, thank you. All right, so just to let you know briefly who Lightship is, because I know that it is a name that many of you will not have heard before. So we are a virtual clinical trial site, in essence. We provide services to pharma and to other sites to help enable flexible models of clinical trials to be conducted and actually even designed on the front end. So we come alongside pharma and biotech companies to help design flexible approaches, and then we help with actual implementation. So we have our own home research nursing staff, our own technology to underpin the service, and our own project managers and central coordinators as well. So we have been running in the US for about 3 years and are now ready for operations in the UK. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about our experience and what we've done and what we've done to leverage that experience in preparing for being able to deliver in the UK as well. So just to connect with what Ruth was saying earlier, we really at Lightship believe that if we can create choice for patients in terms of how and where they have clinical trials, then it increases access and starts to address the equity problem in a trial. So for example, a single mum who has a full-time job is unable to take time off work to go to a clinic visit in the traditional format. But if you're able to either come to her place of work for follow-up visits or come to her home, she doesn't have to have the challenge of taking time off work or finding home care for her children if you could come to her in the evenings, for example. So we strongly believe in providing choice to patients so that we can improve access and equity. And that's what we're all about at Lightship. So we have done a number of trials, and I'm going to tell you about the one that we completed last year. It was a phase 2 trial with one of the top 10 pharma. It was a stasis dermatitis study. We recruited over 100 patients across 5 states, and it was a fully at-home study. So very similar to the design Ruth just described in many ways, but because it wasn't requiring any scanning, we didn't have to have any imaging. The patients were able to stay in their home for the entire study, and all visits were conducted there. We used eConsent, eSource, eISF, and then our Lightship patient app to facilitate the telemedicine. And we sent our home research nurses as well as advanced nurse practitioners, or the US equivalent of advanced nurse practitioners, into the home to conduct all the visits, and connected the investigators to the patients during those visits through the telemedicine on the app. I saw there was a question about less digitally enabled participants. Our app is just an app on a smartphone that you literally click the name of the person you want to speak to or the telemedicine visit, and it just pops up and you have it right there through your smartphone. So it was very simple to use. So because we had everything electronically, the monitoring visits were all done remotely as well. It went very smoothly. In fact, it wasn't without challenges, and I'll share some of those with you. But in terms of the patient experience, we found that the patients had a very positive experience of the approach. 93% of them said that they would participate in another study from home, and all of them said that they were very comfortable with our personnel in the home. And that, we think, is one of the keys to success, is how you approach these home visits or visits wherever they are outside of the usual clinic. So this study actually recruited across 5 states, and one of the key highlights is that if you look at the distance from some of the patients, you will see here at the bottom, 1,388 miles from the PI. We had 3 PIs, one in California, one in Florida, and one in New York. And 82% of the patients lived more than 50 miles away from their PI. So this is just testament to what remote or virtual clinical trials or decentralized clinical trials, whatever you want to call them, this is really testament to what can be achieved. These patients in Texas would not have had the opportunity to be on this trial if it weren't for this model. So this is really a model that can work. However, as Ruth said, it can be very challenging as well. And some of the challenges that we had, I've highlighted here. One being the vendors within the situation, where you have, for example, a lab sample that has to be collected and shipped off to the lab. Even though the home health nurse was able to collect the sample and do the pre-analytical processing and package it up, it still needed to be shipped off to the central lab, and trying to get that pickup time coordinated can be really challenging. Same with the directed patient delivery. If we wanted our nurses in the home when the delivery arrived of the medication, trying to get a window down to within less than an hour to make sure that the shipment arrived when the nurse was there was very challenging. And a lot of providers would say that it's going to be feasible and easy to do, but in reality, it is very hard to do that without impacting the patient's lifestyle and really being an inconvenience for them. So working very closely with the vendors and communicating very regularly with both the patient and the central project management team and the vendors, and doing a lot of education about the importance of accuracy of timing of deliveries was essential to making it work. The next thing was really the study team. We had an approach that we would use our own nurses and not have contract nurses, because that experience of the patient with that nurse was so critical. And that was actually one of the keys to success in this trial, that the patient and the nurse got to know each other. And we ended up actually seeing our nurses being contacted at all hours by the patients about either study-related questions or other questions, just because they had that relationship and they felt safe. And that's something that you can easily lose when you do a remote model. I know Ruth said that it was a study team that they knew, but often it's not a study team they know. If they're recruited through digital media and they're put onto a study, for example, in Texas with the PI in New York, they don't necessarily know that study team. So they do need to get to know that nurse and coordinator and have that consistency of care through that constant relationship, and not a different face every time. Then the actual execution of the visits in the home is going to come with unexpected challenges. For example, we had our nurses encountering snakes and goats and all sorts of other very unexpected situations. And no matter how many times you practice with the equipment and prepare for the visit, you're going to get to the home and then realize that your centrifuge's button has fallen off or something has happened. So having the right staff who are able to think on their feet, walk into a home that is up to the roof in clutter and have no emotional response to that and still be warm and feel secure and make the patient feel secure, it really is a very niche skill set. And so making sure you've got the right team to do it is really vital to the success of a home health visit and a DCT study. And then the technology, we were using the sponsor's preferred vendor for the technology platform, and we really had a lot of challenges, but we were able to give feedback and they were able to make improvements, because if the technology doesn't work, then it can impact the study team. So obviously our app is what the patients interface through, but our study team was trying to enter the e-source at the patient's home. And if that's a problem, then it can impact the patient's experience. So that needs to be seamless and work really well. And then lastly, just making sure that you educate everybody within the team on the DCT model. There were varying levels of knowledge and understanding of the model. I think where we are now is very different to where we were when we set the study up in terms of people's general understanding and acceptance of DCT model. So those were some of our key learnings from our recently completed fully in-home study. But as we started to think about how we prepare for the UK and actually doing trials here, we realized that the population may have some differences. Here we have national health, in the US they don't. And so there may be different perspectives and openness to decentralized trials here compared with the US. So we did some market research in preparation. We surveyed over 500 adults across the UK and found that there was a very positive response to decentralized trials and actually having healthcare provided in the home or in a mobile clinic. So we were trying to not limit it to only home health, but trying to think of what other places outside of your traditional clinic setting could you do clinical trials and what would the uptake be. Almost 90% of the respondents said that they would have an increased likelihood of participating in a trial if it were done in their home or in a mobile clinic as opposed to in the hospital setting. And 92% of respondents said that they were comfortable visiting a mobile clinic for a regular appointment. 91% of the respondents were actually very comfortable having a nurse visit them in their home or having their doctor's appointments over telemedicine. And the reason cited for being so comfortable with this approach was primarily not spending time in a waiting room or having to travel, lower chance of catching COVID, having more flexibility around their lifestyle, and not having to take time off work. So the feedback we got from our market research, and this is just a snippet of it, was very supportive of finding more flexible approaches to clinical trials in the UK. The next thing we decided to do was go to the MHRA. We had already consulted with the FDA a couple of times in the past about the trials and our approach within the US over the past 3 years, but we wanted to understand the MHRA's perspective as well. So we requested a scientific advice meeting with the MHRA, and we met with a group who was incredibly engaged. They discussed with us all the topics that we had, which included investigator oversight, adequate medical coverage. I won't go through all of them, but they're all there when you get the slides. So we had a broad number of topics and we spent the whole afternoon with them. We actually went over our time, which is unusual, and that they allowed us to do that, but it was a very productive conversation. The key takeaways from that meeting was that every study has to have a very detailed risk assessment of every aspect of the DCT components. So everything we put to them, their response started with the risk assessment. Have you done a risk assessment on this? What is the risk to the data? What is the risk to the patient? If you can demonstrate that you have controlled for those, then they were happy with the approach. And that was the general theme across all of their answers. They were very positive about the use of technology in, for example, e-consents. They actually said that, and obviously this is not speaking for the whole MHRA, it's just those that were in this advice meeting. They said that they felt that it could actually provide a better understanding if used correctly. They were very clear that the PI still needs to be in control and that they do see a risk for where you have nurses who are contracted from a separate or third party going out into the patient's home on behalf of the PI, that there has to be that PI control. And I can probably just answer one of the questions that came up already on that, in that investigator oversight, what the approach that we've taken is that we have the investigators have an opportunity to assess the nurses, meet with the nurses and discuss their experience and training, and if necessary, demonstrate their skills and experience. Only once they've done that are they delegated by the PI on the delegation log, and then we create regular opportunities for meetings. So we have weekly meetings that the PI attends with the nurses. We document those and minute those so that we've got documentation of that oversight. And then for the source, the PI has to be in control of the design of the source as well, even if it's on eSource. And then the last takeaway from the MHRA was really that you have to have contingency plans in place. Anything could go wrong, so you have to identify any of the possible points of failure, especially in your technology systems, and make sure that you have robust contingencies in place. So in summary, we really have learned over the past couple of years of doing this in the US, and as we thought about what we're going to do for implementing in the UK, we've realized that there is more of an adoption curve and a continuum when it comes to DCT than a one-size-fits-all. We've heard a lot of people saying that it's all in home or all in clinic, and it's not DCT unless you're doing it all in home. And we actually don't think that is the case. We think that most trials these days have a degree of DCT in them, whether it's shipping one thing to the home or doing one visit via telephone. Most visits, most studies have got a degree of it, and different sponsors and different regulators and even different patient populations are at different places on the adoption curve for how comfortable they are with having things in the home or outside of the clinic setting. And our biggest learning is the need to come alongside sponsors and come alongside patient populations and understand what those needs are, understand where they are on the adoption curve, and meet them where they're at, making sure that the trial is designed in a way that suits the patient population's needs, protects the data that the sponsor needs, and is possible to implement. Because sometimes the best ideas are actually not that viable when it comes to implementation, and for both the patient and the site, pushing it into a model that isn't fit for that study is not going to be the best solution. So we've just discovered that you've really got to do that assessment, and when you're designing the study upfront, ensure that it is an approach that gives the patients choices that they need and enables the sponsor to really have that improved access and improved diversity, while retaining excellence in the actual data of the study. So if you have any other questions, I welcome them in the chat session. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristin. And for the last speaker within the panel, I would like to introduce now David Collier, who is a clinical director of William Harvey Clinical Research Center, clinical and public and patient involvement and engagement lead for Barts Cardiovascular Clinical Trials Unit, and PPI and engagement strategy lead for Barts Biomedical Research Center, as well as interim director of Barts CTU. David has worked within clinical trials since 1997. And his clinical research center has actually recruited successfully large numbers of patients over the 22 years. And they're working with the patients actively to influence development of the new therapeutics and patient collaborations. David, if you want to turn on your camera and maybe introduce also some of the work within Barts CTU.
Thank you, Ivana, and thanks to the first two speakers. Unlike the first two speakers, I wasn't really going to have a formal slot, so just a few comments about experience of, and I suppose I should explain I'm both poacher and gamekeeper in this sense, because I'm used to local recruitment models based on 100 GP surgeries in the East End of London, for large-scale trials like ASCOT, which was the first trial to show that atorvastatin prevented heart attacks and strokes, and numerous other studies for asthma and COPD and diabetes things over the last 20 or so years. So my perspective is very much as one of being the site lead for a site with 20-odd very diverse staff representing 9 or 10 countries at any one time in our staff base. But thankfully, we've, as Kristin says, the continuity of staff is really important to the trial site, and it's really good to see that those sorts of things are being worried about for virtual trials. For COVID, I redesigned one of my studies for remote care of hypertension to actually allow us to titrate blood pressure medication for patients remotely from our centre. So we were just doing telemonitoring visits having sent IMP to study participants' homes, having it remotely assess their blood pressure control through a phone app, and participants were putting the blood pressures into the app. So it was a fully decentralized model, which gave us a few challenges from a technical point of view. But we were probably lucky that we weren't working with multiple vendors, which we would normally have been. But I totally understand the experiences of Ruth and Kristin for doing remote trials. Sometimes the lack of flexibility and problems associated with vendor provision of services for trials means that that all the frustrations that are familiar to clinical site staff get transported out to the patient's home. So I suppose the advantage is that the vendors will become even more sensitized to what users think of the services they provide, which all too often are a bit clunky. So I totally sympathize with that. Totally agree that study patients are keen to explore other options. I suppose my anxiety, and I think we probably need to move on to questions fairly quickly, but it's probably fair to say my main concern about decentralized studies, and especially as Ruth is doing in oncology, where I used to work, is the potential, is safeguarding against the potential loss of the non-randomized benefits of clinical trials. So making sure that participants still get that personal care and attention that they get, the added TLC they get as being part of the trial. And I'm sure they are getting that by the sound of it from specialist nurses. But it's fascinating to watch the evolution of such studies. But as Kristin says, it's probably not necessarily going to be one size fits all. There are going to be situations where the patients, particularly for source data verification and eligibility at the start and consent, and physical examination, where visit to a trial site, especially in the UK setting, might be optimal, but some of their later visits might well be facilitated by home visits and reduced effort. But I think maybe that's all you need from me for now.
Thank you, David. And at this point, I would like to also invite Kristin, Ruth, and Suki if they can turn on their cameras and their microphones, because we're going to start the panel discussion. We already have quite a few questions in the chat. So if I start with Ruth first, we have a question from Isa, who was kind enough to ask the first question and open the flood. How is the medical adherence tracked in Roche study? So obviously the study that you've been talking about is just opening, but you said there are studies in other indications that Roche has already conducted. So if you can talk about that experience and adherence.
So to be honest, with the whole I haven't actually been involved with other fully decentralized studies within Roche actually at the moment. So unfortunately, I can't really talk too much about the medical assurance. I mean, I know from this study in our setup, and I think as we've all kind of spoken about in the other talks as well, is that obviously the ownership of the patient safety and the medical concerns and everything will all come under the PI. So it will the responsibilities for treating that patient will all come under that the PI. Obviously, because we are using a vendor for mobile nursing, that although it is a vendor, the responsibility will still come under the PI for ensuring that all the everything is covered for that patient.
I see everyone nodding, but David, do you want to add anything as a PI on this panel?
Well, as we said, it does come down to the confidence that comes back between the patient and the PI and through the study team, is that there's a really direct connection between the patients and the PI, and it does partly depend on the adequacy of that communication. So all parties feel comfortable to put their proverb metaphorical hand up and get in touch and say hello. I know my own regulatory team at the medical school are horrified when Dr. Saxena, my colleague, and I tend to make sure that our personal mobiles are what our patients have access to. And they suck through their teeth, and my GP wife thinks I'm mad and definitely breaking the rules. But the truth is that most of our patients think they've won the jackpot because 24 hours a day, they've got somebody to contact. So I'm sure that with decentralized trials, again, it's all down to the relationships. If your decentralized staff are working well and they relate to the PI and the patients have all the access they want, then I suppose it's a bit different from the US setting that Ruth was describing, where sometimes you had patients 1,000 miles away. We have had patients travel 800 miles for study in the UK occasionally, to our amazement. Yeah, I'm sure all of these things can be achieved. It's going to be an interesting learning curve, though, sometimes.
Thank you, David. Next question. I think it was asked in the beginning, but I think that it's probably most appropriate for Suki as a representative of NIHR. So Suki, Catherine Jobson is asking, will the NIHR be drafting a purpose-built model agreement for these studies? I guess it's referring to decentralized studies.
Thanks, Ivana. There are some people I can see from the coordinating center that might want to comment from a kind of central perspective, but from a local perspective, I can say there is no script that we're going to use. So we will be the lead CRN for this Roche trial, and the chief investigator sits in Glasgow. And we will be testing the system along with Roche. We have no script on how to deliver this study. It's not going to be easy at all. We will certainly be testing the boundaries. So maybe something can be written after, but we certainly don't have a model to follow right now.
Thank you, Suki. Next question.
I just wanted to know, from a site perspective, I know unfortunately we couldn't have any representatives from Glasgow at the moment, but they were investigating whether the hub and spoke agreement, that's obviously not been agreed or finalised as yet, but they were looking into that was a possible option for using to contract out to the local imaging centres. So just for your awareness.
Thank you, Ruth. Next question, I think it's most appropriate for Kristin and for David, is asked by Ronelle, asking, how do you deal with staff turnover? It appears that this model is very labor intensive for the nurses who will have to be on call all the time. David, you also mentioned PIs being on call all the time. How do you retain your staff in order to provide a continuity of care for patients?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think it's one of the biggest challenges, and especially with the increase in people wanting to use the model, there is a lot of competition for research nurses, because there's a difference between somebody who does nursing in home health and a research nurse who understands the implementation of the protocol and the importance of source documentation. So at Lightship, as I mentioned, we've got our approach as having our own staff and not contract nurses. And they're our goal. And actually, when they were really busy on that stasis derm study, they said that was the happiest that they've been in their career, because they felt like they were a team. They felt so valued and valuable to the patients that they loved it. So we actually were able to retain the staff despite them having to travel really far distances, but they went in pairs as well, because it was always a research nurse and an advanced nurse practitioner together, and then they had a study coordinator who was working with them. So we actually had a lot of internal lessons learned as to what worked, and it was about building that team morale, building that focus, making sure that the whole team understands how valuable the nurses are and not seeing them as a commodity. and just making sure that they have the resources that they need, make sure the technology works for them, make sure they have the equipment they need, take as much of the burden off them as you can, and let them do what they love doing. They loved it. They absolutely loved going into the homes and dealing with the challenges and problem solving together. And interestingly now, if we say that they are home health nurses, they push back on us and say, no, please don't call us home health nurses. We are research nurses who do home health care, because that was really important to them, that they are actually research nurses and they're specialized in that and not just home health carers. So we learned a lot from that, and I'm not saying it's always going to work, but it worked really well in our experience so far.
It's really interesting. For our remote care blood pressure study, we had, because we were working during acute COVID, we had some members of staff who were shielding and unable to come in here and doing all of their work remotely with patients. We weren't going into people's homes for obvious reasons in that setting, and it was all remote with app and data and calls. Intriguingly, nearly always not video calls but phone calls. I was rather surprised that with often quite young staff that both patients and staff tended to opt for phone calls rather than video calls, which we were all set up to do, but almost nobody did. Whether it was too invasive, I'm not quite sure. Obviously different from nurses going into homes directly, but agree entirely about patients needing continuity. That's hugely important. And I suppose one anxiety about, in a sense, what Kristin says about demand for staff for decentralized models is at a time when both centrally for clinical trials units, nationally, the directors all have problems with staff retention, with people being sucked out into pharma particularly. I suspect we'll also have a problem with experienced research nurses being sucked out in different directions into pharma and into possibly also into remote care settings. Perhaps the trick would be if we could actually use the more innovative models to attract people back who don't want to commute into the local centres, and that's put them off the trials nursing maybe that they used to do. But I'm a hopeless optimist. I don't know whether we're going to be able to cope with our sort of manpower and woman power problems.
Thank you, David. Going to a bit more practical questions, one for Ruth. How are the local radiology facilities treated in IRAS, and are they added as sites?
The answer again is, unfortunately, I don't know at the moment. We are looking into this on kind of with Suki and the team there, kind of working out how we how we treat the radiology departments, obviously whether they're NHS or private, and kind of the recognition that they will get as well as for part of this trial. So that is definitely something that we are aware of, and within this, so if you look at the hub and spoke agreement that's been produced by the MHRA, it actually does identify that if you do use a site, to actually enter them into the IRAS as a site. So we kind of that may be an option, but I think it depends on how we contract with them and to kind of whether they go into the IRAS or not. I think it's definitely in development, and we shall see sort of what happens. I don't know, Suki, if you have anything else to add to that.
Just agree with you, Ruth. We haven't sort of firmed up all those details yet. We're still working through some of those questions right now. So it struck me that we should have a symposium like this in a year's time to give everyone an update as to how some of these things were addressed.
Certainly, from a site perspective, we've got multiple other agencies helping with scanning where we've not got enough capacity across Barts Health at the moment. So we're having to use private hospitals who've got more scanning capacity than the trust has with the big catch up. So I think it's not straightforward wherever you're going to get your imaging at the moment.
Thank you all. I think the next question should really go to everyone. You all mentioned some of the challenges with moving from the classical to decentralized model trials. Can you talk a bit about the benefits you've seen so far. So one of the questions from Ben Austin was, has the decentralized model improved recruitment for the trials?
Maybe I'll go first, considering we've done some completed trials. And it's the challenge that we have is actually getting enough data to compare where you've got non-DCT and DCT sites in the same study. And so we can say what we think, and from what we've seen, we think it does. And when we create our patient funnels with the population and then the number of screens, theoretically, it looks like it does. However, the problem is that you need a study, which IMI is doing, the radial study, to really be able to compare in a controlled way within the same study, whether it's actually having an impact. Because in the studies we've done it, we've all been decentralized, or the stasis dermatitis study, for example, we were the only site. So there's not enough data to really show that objectively, but our expectation is that it will. So we use digital recruitment as well. And so obviously the more places you can access patients and allow them to be part of the trial, the more places you're going to post your digital adverts and ensure people are aware of the trial. So it increases your potential leads who could come into a trial. And so in essence, it should increase your recruitment, but more data is needed objectively.
Okay, David, do you wanna?
Well, I think digital front ends help trial recruitment across different sorts of sites. So we're seeing a big differential in recruitment according to the extent to which study sponsors and organisers are prepared to entertain, radio campaigns, social media campaigns, and actively support recruitment, which is often the Cinderella that gets forgotten. Undoubtedly, it can be positive to have remote studies. I mean, we had 360 odd paid participants in our remote care blood pressure study, and that was not difficult to recruit for the remote model. But then it was on the background, it being very hard for people to see their doctors, so that probably made us more attractive at the time.
Yeah, I mean, our stasis dermatitis study did recruit ahead of expectations, so I suppose that's a good thing. But we did take the question to the MHRA because we wanted to know whether they felt there would be bias with using digital recruitment as opposed to just traditional methods of recruitment. Are you now attracting a different cohort of potential patients, and is that going to impact it? And their response was that they actually thought that only doing recruitment from your own referral network was more biased than doing that plus digital, because now you were able to access a broader population. And we've actually just yesterday finished analyzing data on around 5,000 leads that we've got for an Alzheimer's study. And we have more diverse leads from the digital campaigns than we have from the patients' referral networks from the sites. So that was really encouraging to see.
Thank you, Kristin. I'm just wondering whether we have any more time for questions, because I think we are supposed to finish on the dot. So I'm going to hand over again to Suki to give us the last few words.
Thanks, Ivana. Apologies that we've run out of time, but I think it's testament that we've to a good session that we've not been able to answer all the questions, and we will endeavour to answer some of those questions via email after the session finishes today. And just wanted to thank all the speakers for their presentations this afternoon. Really, really interesting. And I think it's obvious that, no one has all the answers. This session was really an educational symposium for us to pose some of the questions that everyone is asking of the system right now. And, it's companies like Roche testing the UK to run this fully decentralized trial that will give us some of the answers to be able to push forward. But if we don't test the system, I don't think we can, ever push further forward. So thank you everyone for all your questions and participating this afternoon. We will certainly be having another session in this series very soon. and look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks, everyone. Bye.